Welcome to Rovertime podcast number 38 on this Easter day. How is everyone doing? I am Duffer Life, your host for tonight, and with me are JP McGlone and Crow. Can I get you guys to say hi?
Hi.
Hi.
So, what is catching people's interest in the wild world of the internet tonight? Has anyone here been paying attention to what's been going on since the unfortunate assassination of a Russian diplomat in the UK?
I have not been paying attention because I'm not very much aware of Russian geopolitics from such a detailed perspective.
Now, a little bit of backstory here. It's there's a bit of alarmism going on because people are like, oh my God, this is leading back into a Cold War. And it's like, well, has the Cold War ever really ended? But Russians have been accused of poisoning a diplomat in the UK using a fairly nasty type of neurotoxin. And it has resulted in Russian diplomat. He was 20 years something retired, Jay Fry is telling us. So thank you, Jay Fry, for the heads up. But anyhow, he was poisoned, and in retaliation, the UK expelled several Russian diplomats, and now Russia is returning suit. So, if we're working on the premise that Russia is willing to poison its former agents, what does that say about international politics right now?
Well, what it says is that Russia is just as corrupt as it's always been. I mean, this isn't anything new. You just take a look at the Soviet Union. The last guy to stop clapping the first guy to stop clapping gets shot. You know, come on. This isn't anything new.
Now, my sort of question with this is, when it comes to diplomatic relations between superpowers, is sort of a Cold War mentality in us versus them in inevitability? Because in order to sort of create your sphere of influence, you kind of have to define who is on your side and who are your enemies. Eisenhower was famous for saying, yes, those dictators are bastards, but at least they are our bastards. And is this another form of Cold War that's shaping up, where Russia is now going to try and say, this is our part of the world again. We're going to try and enforce what we had because we can get a lot more out of our trade relations with dependent countries as opposed to what we've been trying to do as an equal country?
Well, I don't really think so, because to seize these countries by force would be incredibly expensive. And basically, it's the same reason why people don't go to war for oil, contrary to popular belief. I mean, take a look at the war in Iraq. The war in Iraq cost what, $100 billion per year, and the global annual revenues of ExxonMobil are about $200 billion per year. So it's very expensive to go to war, even with a country like Iraq. So for Russia to basically go Soviet bloc again, that would take a lot of money, and that would bankrupt them again. So I think that they're not going to do that. It's a lot cheaper to just buy stuff than it is to steal it again.
Now, would this be sort of a shell game then, where Russia is trying to look the part of the superpower when in fact they're having a great deal more problems than we might be aware of, and better to keep people's eyes away from those problems than actually have to deal with what's going on at home, perhaps economically or perhaps culturally or socially?
Wow, Putin engaging in dick measuring contests. This is nothing new. Again, Russia has not changed a bit.
Well, you know, we always hope we can change, but I don't know if many people can. But JP, do you have any thoughts on this?
Oh, I mean, this Russia stuff is just so far out of my domain. I know very little about this.
Yeah. Big Dick Vladimir. That's basically all he tries to do all the time. He just tries to show off. I mean, this is the guy who went shirtless on a horse trying to pose like a glamour magazine. Who do you think you're talking about? Come on.
Well, according to Russia Weekly, the sexiest man in Russia for 3 years running.
Yes, and according to the North Korean news network, Kim Jong-il is a god who can read minds.
Now, speaking of Kim Jong, he spent the last week in China, cozying up with, what's the president of China's name again? I'm drawing a blank right now.
Xi Jinping?
Xi Jinping. And apparently, according to Xi Jinping, the Sino-Soviet agreement, or at least the Sino-Soviet North Korean agreement, is still considered an asset between the two countries. And to help celebrate this, he sent the leader of North Korea to South Korea to watch a K-pop band concert. So apparently that went over like a lead brick in Korea.
What exactly was the problem?
That a K-pop band would actually play for Kim Jong-un.
So that I guess that they're kind of pissed. I don't see why they're surprised.
Yeah, but it's kind of an interesting time in the news because, of course, not a lot is happening, or at least there's not a lot of stuff which has been newsworthy. But we have a bunch of political wrangling that's going on in semi-view of the public. And this is 2 weeks out from when Donald Trump is apparently sitting down with Kim Jong-un to talk about who knows what, because I'm not actually sure what they would be negotiating for. It's like, give up your nukes. And Kim Jong-un will say, no. Stop embargoing us. And Trump will probably say, no. And we can look forward to another 40 years of the status quo.
Yeah, essentially, I think Michael Malice makes an excellent point about this in regards to North Korea being pretty unstable, because there's no way he's going to be able to keep this up forever. I mean, the people will be unsatisfied. Just even the fact that they see, hey, they have electricity and we don't. What gives? Basically, a lot of people hated Kim Jong-il because of the fact that there was a famine under him, and that kind of ruined his credibility a lot. And there's also, of course, the point of the internet and information becoming more widely available. So it's basically what led to revolution in the Middle East, that people saw it on Twitter, just say, hey, look, these people have so much better lives than us. What gives? So it's not going to be able to exist forever. So I don't think that North Korea is going to be around in 40 years in the future, but maybe I'll be wrong.
Well, you're actually in sort of the right ballpark. We've yet to see a communist regime exist for in excess of 80 years. I think Cuba is actually the longest standing, or was the longest standing, because I'm not sure if you can consider them completely communist anymore, although they're still more along that line. So I do think eventually North Korea will implode under its own weight. The thing which I'm hoping doesn't happen is that they don't do what they did to Germany when East Germany tried to come back from the Cold War, because they amalgamated the two Germanys and basically made West Germany foot the bill for East German repairs and modernization. And I have a feeling that the global community is going to try and do exactly the same thing with South Korea, where it's like, oh, look, North Korea is no longer a dictatorship. South Korea, you handle it. And it's like, that's not an ideal way of bringing a former third world country into more of a G1 standing.
Who would you propose pays for it?
Well, that's the problem, is I don't actually think anyone needs to pay for it. I do think, though, that if we provide aid, what we wanted to be doing is providing aid for domestic level industry and growth. Will that happen? Probably not. But it would be better if we gave sort of more aid with, let's say, less strings, or, as Crow will probably point out, let the free market help the North Koreans by letting companies go in there, let the North Koreans pick what they want to do, and through that sort of industry coming into the country, eventually they'll get more wealth and more money which they can spend on things which they want, as opposed to just food and everyday living things. But what are your guys' thoughts?
You know me so well. Yeah, basically, I want to go Hong Kong with North Korea. Just let them do what Hong Kong did, and they'll be fine in a couple generations, and they'll just be a first world country. No problem.
Any thoughts on this there, JP?
Nope, I was just going to say I've seen pictures of North Korea, and it's beautiful. So I wouldn't mind visiting it if we're still around.
Did you see, do you mean North Korea or Pyongyang, the capital?
I don't know. Maybe I just saw propaganda that.
Yeah, you probably saw Pyongyang, the capital. Because the rest of it, look, there's only one picture you need to see of North Korea, and that's a picture at night from space. You could see the difference between North and South Korea.
Okay, I'm gonna look that up.
Yeah, go ahead, look it up right now. You'll see North Korea versus South Korea space photo, and you'll see exactly my point. one is bright and shiny, and the other one is
That's
dark.
bizarre. One looks like a galaxy, and the other one looks like the North Star. Like there's just one spot where there's light.
That's Pyongyang, the capital.
Man.
That's the only place that has electricity.
Like the opposite of that scene from Lion King, you know, where everything's lit up except the one spot.
Yeah. Except now there's no Simba.
Yeah.
To save the day from whatever that guy's name is. Scar, I believe.
Scar.
Yeah, I got it right. But how do we go to North Korea from Russian diplomats?
Well, we're sort of hopping around former communist and current communist nations.
Yeah, fair enough. But here's the thing. When it comes to the Russian diplomats, again, I don't see the need for diplomats. Just let people trade, and it works out just fine. It's kind of astonishing how people just don't understand these basic concepts. There's an essay called I, Pencil that demonstrates this concept perfectly. It basically talks about how much it takes to make a pencil from around the world. And there's so much that goes into it. Tens of millions of people working together to make a pencil. We don't need diplomats.
Yeah. Well, I think, Crow, with that sort of thing, it's the idea that Homo economicus, as it gets put by, what was his name? Drawing a lot of blanks today, don't know why. But anyhow, the idea of Homo economicus, that we always act as if things would be economically expedient, or economic expediency is the common driver in human behavior, I think is a bit of a misnomer and a fallacy as well. We tend to want to function within a group, but we also have limitations to how we go about doing that. And therefore, you have specialists who become diplomats who are specialized in dealing with other groups' things. So I think there's a bit of an interpretive framework, but it would be cool, I think, if you could just say that let the market decide, because people will work together. And if you don't want to work together with those people, you don't have to.
Yeah, they already do.
Yeah.
I mean, again, if you take a look at basically pencils and computers and toenail clippers have done more to bring the world together than any diplomats have. Just the fact that some people say, hey, we'll give you money if you give us some graphite, Mongolia. And then Mongolia says, sure, we'll give you graphite. And then we trade. And lo and behold, everything's honky-dory and everything's peaceful. And people just work together. They may hate each other. They may not even know each other's names. They may not even know that the other people exist. But they trade. And it works. Beauty of the market.
Yeah. No, the going along that sort of line, though, is we as a species, I think the big problem is, as I say, we're not defined strictly by a rational set of actions, or a tendency to congregate towards rational actors in terms of things like trades and whatnot. And
but we don't need to be rational. That's the thing. Most people who trade around the world, most people who go to the store and utilize the price mechanism to buy things, they don't actually believe in free markets. Most of these people don't believe in free markets, and yet they still do it because that's just what they have to do. It works the best, so they get best results. Everyone turns out just fine.
Any thoughts on that there, JP?
Not really. I think I don't know enough about it, but I do think that any kind of answer that is like, just do this and it'll work out, requires some digging.
Yeah. I'm always a little leery of reduction to single causation sort of things, and not to go after you with that there, Crow. It's just that I always think it always ends up being far more complicated, mostly because we have the human variable involved. And we as a species, even if we take advantage of particular systems that do work well, we might not actually think about it, as you point out. And this is why we can unintentionally damage long-standing systems that have helped us, simply because we don't think about them anymore. They've sort of rendered themselves invisible. Go ahead there, Crow.
Oh, yeah, my point is basically that we don't really need to speculate. We already see it happening right now. I mean, just think about how much stuff goes into your smartphone. I mean, the touchscreen alone is indium tin oxide. All right, that's a very complicated material. You can't just find it in the ground. it takes a lot of people from around the world to make that touchscreen happen. So we already see it happening. People can cooperate when you just give them the right market incentives. There's not really speculation required.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I'm with JP on this, Crow. Unfortunately, this is your wheelhouse, and I can't really speak too much besides that. But speaking of JP, our good friend JP got to meet another good friend named JP relatively recently. JP got to hang out with Jordan Peterson at one of his most recent talks about his book, 12 Rules for Combating Chaos. 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences there, JP?
Yeah, I went to the Beacon Theater in New York, and I think it was the first place that he's doing this tour. So we got a few surprises. First of all, we got there, and everyone's getting really excited. Starts giving this huge round of applause because they're starting the show, and Dave Rubin walks out, which was honestly, I mean, I was excited for Peterson, but it just like almost multiplied it by 2, right? It was really cool. And he gave a good talk, and I'm really impressed with the way he talked to the crowd. I'm sure you guys have heard him speak about how when he talks to a crowd, he tries to look at people and feel and kind of bounce off of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very true. Like there are times where he's like looking right at, I was in the 3rd row. So he's like looking right in your eyes, and he's just like talking to you for like 2 minutes, or maybe not 2 minutes, but it feels that way. But yeah, he talked about his book, and then I had bought a VIP ticket. Me and my friend had gone together. So we got to do a meet and greet after, and I gave him a little gift with like a piece of artwork. It wasn't my artwork. Found a piece of artwork while I was here in Raleigh. It's like this guy fighting a dragon. So I thought it was a nice thing to gift Peterson. And I told him about the meetup that I host because it's around him. So we have a study group here in Raleigh called Sort Yourself Out. It's just a Jordan Peterson study group. But yeah, meeting him was really cool. There's a picture. It's on my Facebook, or I think I put it on Twitter. I'm not positive. Yeah, anything you want to know specifically?
Well, I was going to say, sorry, just to jump in there, I'll let you go in a second. Yeah. If you would like, I can actually put your Twitter bio and all that into the comments after the recording is finished. So remind me after that, but go ahead, Crow.
Oh, yeah, what do you do in the study group? What do you study?
Oh, man, we covered all different topics. We've been doing it since October, and we've done everything from like recently we did absolute free speech, where we just talked about, what it means. Some of the examples of absolute free speech, some of the examples of the limitations on absolute free speech, are they actually limitations, or are you being penalized for something else? We've talked about, actually we had one meetup simply titled, Can Men and Women Work Together in the Workplace? Because it was a direct quote from the Vice interview that Peterson did. So we usually just take something recent that he's talked about, or that he's talked about or he's touched on even a little bit, and then we just kind of dive into it as deep as we can. Although I do think we need to figure out more things, because we've grown to like over 60 members, and we only do one meetup every 2 weeks that allows 12 people tops because of just the situation. So I'm trying to do like another one once a month where we maybe go more deep into a single topic, because even free speech absolutism is kind of broad. But it's been fun. Yeah. We've been just doing those sorts of things. And I think one time we had like a fun meetup where we went bowling, and surprisingly it was the one with the least attendance. Don't understand it. People prefer deep intellectual conversation over bowling and booze.
No. See, you made a mistake at the outset there, JP. You should have made it a cleaning your room party, and everyone would have showed up.
Actually, that's a good idea. My room does need cleaning, and I can invite them all.
Yeah, I clean my room all the time.
Yeah.
It worked. I mean, I cleared out a bunch of stuff. I just threw out everything in my closet, really. Just about everything. It goes to show how much stuff builds up.
Would it be inappropriate if I made it like a clean my room meetup? Like everybody just comes to my house and cleans my room for me?
Well, see, you make it like a pub crawl, but it's a room cleaning crawl. Ooh. So like you give the people free beers for showing up, and they get to clean yours, and then they go and they clean the next person's and the next person's, and you see how many rooms you can clean before everyone's just passed out.
That is a great idea. I'm gonna pitch it, and I'm pretty sure like 3 people would say sure, and I like know which 3 those are. But
That actually sounds like a fun activity, to be honest.
No, absolutely. And you have to live blog it too. So like when you're Craiglisting stuff, you have to like video blog that, and then, you know, track yourself as you're going to the next person, how much you stumble, how quickly you can move between houses cleaning.
that would be amazing. I'm sure it would actually get views on YouTube.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay, let's call it Jordan Peterson Clean Your Room Pub Crawl.
Oh my God. I'm doing it. I'm going to try it. And one last thing, and this is somewhat to brag because I'm kind of happy about it. So one of the members of the meetup group, he's friends with a journalist at the Washington Times, and the last meetup I had was right before I took my trip to New York, right, to see Peterson. And it was his first time at the meetup, and he asked if he could take notes, and he was just taking notes. His friend was just trying to see like, what is it that draws people to Jordan Peterson? And, you know, now that my group popped up on their radar, they were like, oh, we could pull some information from there. Well, the day or 2 after I met Jordan Peterson, you know, I went to the whole talk or whatever. The journalist guy like calls me and he interviews me. And there's actually an article now in the Washington Times if you want to look at it. I mean, it's good. A lot of people are saying, wow, it's actually a nice article about Jordan Peterson, or a fair article about Jordan Peterson. But in the last 5 paragraphs, they mention the meetup and they mention my name, which is like the coolest thing. And Peterson just shared that article. So I know he saw my name, which is really nice.
Nice. Very nice, JP. To backtrack a little bit, that Vice interview that he did ended up being very contentious in my circles. A friend of mine posted it, and he goes, look, Jordan Peterson can't deal with women in the workplace. And I watched the thing which Vice released, and I go, this thing is heavily cut. Like, they are jump cutting a lot. And I'm like, I think this is really out of context. And the person's like, what do you mean? And I go, well, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't really feel like something Jordan Peterson would say. And sure enough, they released the extended video. The sad thing for me, along with his friend sort of jumping to this, was Roaming Millennial actually jumped on the Vice interview as if it was the entirety of the interview, and was, you know, kind of annoyed with Jordan Peterson for basically saying men and women can't really work together. It just doesn't work. And it's like, that's not what he said at all, if you look at the thing in context. So it actually ended up generating quite a lot of controversy, more so because he was intentionally taken out of context than anything which he said in context. But what are your guys' thoughts? Well,
when it comes to men and women working together in the workforce, I gotta say that there is a valid argument to make that men and women in the workforce together create needless drama, but at the same time, there is a market solution to this. Okay, now I know a lot of people will kind of jump on me for commodifying relationships in the workplace and trying to be as utilitarian and robotic as possible, but hear me out. This is a pretty good solution that I have. All right, basically, you have a web page at work. Basically an office web page where people can write down who they're romantically interested in or infatuated with, and then submit. And then if 2 people refer to each other on their own pages, then they get notified of a match. This way, there cannot possibly be any misunderstandings. And if you don't want to participate, just don't write anybody down and you'll never get a match. They'll never get a match with you. And you don't actually have to go through the awkward situation of telling the person to their face that you're romantically interested. You could just keep it on the down low, put your submissions online, and then when you both refer to each other, you get your match. And if you don't, then you know the person's not interested in you, and vice versa.
Vice versa. Yeah, no, to me, that solution is more in the direction of more awkward, and I don't like that. I'd rather just people be able to take risks, and like, it's just shitty. Like, the risk used to be rejection, you know, and maybe some awkwardness in the workplace. But now it's like you get fired and your whole career is ruined because now people think you're some sort of sexual deviant at work because you hit on a girl.
But this way, that never happens. You see, it's simple.
Well, yeah, I could pick that.
This is kind of where I'd counter with the idea that you're once again reducing it to a completely knowable and logical source. And it's like, from my own personal experience, and you know, I have trouble with this too, is it's like there are certain like literally, if a certain type of woman looks at me in a certain way or turns sideways in a certain light, I know that my sort of autonomic nervous system literally goes, that's desirable. And I'm just like, oh, because I'm not trying to be creepy or things like that. But the thing is, my eyes were drawn there. And so it's not that I could write down someone's name and be like, yes, I'm potentially interested in this person. It's rather, it's an ongoing response. And now I, as hopefully a mature and maturing adult, what I do is I realize this is something which is happening to me, and it's my sort of chemical reaction. Therefore, it doesn't need to impinge upon the woman's rights, or the woman doesn't even have to know. I have to self-edit. And if an unfortunate situation sort of crops up, I want to have sort of shown myself to be a good person and someone who is someone who you're willing to laugh things off at. But there are things in terms of when I'm working with someone from the opposite sex, or even someone who I might have a man crush on, where it's like, oh, shoot, I am having a chemical response to this person. How can I get rid of that? Or what tools can I use so that I'm not turning into that creep who no one in the office wants to work with because they're eyeing you all the time?
Yeah. And I would dial it back to, like, because your original question was about kind of what Peterson had said in that interview, I guess. And I don't even think he was arguing that men and women can't work together. I think it was more meta than that. He was just asking the question. And just like the Bill C-16 thing, it seems like asking the question is uncomfortable for people. Like, we're not even allowed to entertain the question of can women and men work together. Or I think a better way to put it is, what does it mean for men and women to work together?
Well, they do it all the time.
Right. So, like, if you just ask, can men and women work together? The answer is obviously yes. I think he later asked, can men and women work together and there never be sexual harassment? Well, I think the answer clearly there would be no. And obviously people are trying to optimize for less sexual harassment, but I don't think the solution involves, these websites like you're proposing, or like, I think it's more in the line of what Duff is saying. You know, we just got to be a little more conscious, a little more self-editing. But I also think that people, like the women receiving the unwanted attention, have some responsibility to bear. It's not like every guy who approaches you is now to be written off as some sort of creep. You know, there's a way to manage that situation from that end as well. But I feel like what's happening more and more is everything that gets regulated in the workplace makes it so women generally don't need to, they don't have to do anything. Like, it's all the regulations seem to be a burden on the men. And that is something I'm interested in, because I don't see male sexuality or female sexuality as necessarily wrong or gross or weird. I just think they're different. So to impose rules that seem to disproportionately affect one is not something I'm in favor of. But I think generally, if you really let men and women just kind of be men and women at the workplace, you're going to see a lot of self-segregation. The guys are going to get together and talk and be guys. The girls are going to get together and talk and be girls. And I would love to see a workplace like that. But
yeah, and I think what sort of Jordan has been speaking to is that the office environment is currently one which is being renegotiated. And renegotiated in a way that is producing environments which we haven't stereotypically seen as frequently, which are either female dominated in places which were not female dominated, or where the ethic of the office has gone more towards the female end of the spectrum, but not even just female kind of third wave, kind of victim orientated. So in doing that, where does it leave men? Because even if you're not ogling someone continuously, or you're actually out to hit on someone in a sort of sexually provocative manner, it leaves a lot of questions. Because when you're working with in an office of, let's say, 5 guys, what's acceptable and what's considered playful and what's considered, good, clean competition between members in the same office can be very, very different. And trying to negotiate what that looks like in increasingly more mixed environments in a sort of atmosphere that doesn't allow for that negotiation and that sort of playfulness and that sort of poking and prodding at one another to figure out where you stand, it leaves a lot of us in the lurch, and not necessarily for a good reason. It's taking something which organically, let's say, would be able to settle itself within reason, not always, and proposing a very stilted and ideologically laden answer to it that is shutting out the male voice, or even if it's not even just the male voice, just male ways of acting within a competitive office environment.
So basically, can't work with women. Yeah, there we go.
Well, yeah, possibly, but more so like what are the ground rules? Because we can totally work with women and women can totally work with men. It's when someone or some external force is taking the negotiation of that workspace away from the people in it in such a way as to say, this is the right way and this is the wrong way, and you're not allowed to question and you're not allowed to create your own group norms.
Yeah, I think as long as we have such a significant portion of our population denying the fact that men and women are in fact different, and that there is a dynamic between them that is not purely socially constructed, I think it's going to be really hard to make any progress. Like I think it's only going to regress and get worse, because the only people I see complaining about working with men or complaining about working with women are feminists complaining about the men and men complaining about the feminists. Like I don't see like the traditional kind of man and woman complaining at all. And that's both at work and in the household. Like I had a conversation recently with a friend's mother who was saying she quite enjoyed, and this kind of mirrors what Camille Paglia said if you watched the Jordan Peterson Camille Paglia interview, but she kind of enjoys the whole after dinner, the guys go and talk about guy things and the girls clean up and they talk about stuff. But it's like, we're not allowed to do that because that's giving into the patriarchy. So now bring that into the workplace. It's like whatever the women might actually enjoy doing, it's like they're pressured not to do it. They have to behave like men, and the men have to kind of cater to that kind of woman. I think it's ironic because I think that is actually social engineering.
Yeah, and what's interesting with the Camille Paglia, at least her as an example, is she would probably go and hang out with the guys because that's how she's always orientated herself. And she's also saying it as a communal effort. The people who want to go and clean up, let them do it, but let it be people. Don't force someone to do it, or don't make it so that someone always has to do it. So allow people to gravitate towards the things that make them feel good. Like, for me personally, I love to cook for people. I also love for people to clean up after I've cooked for them. And so it's like, let that sort of negotiation take place. And oftentimes that negotiation or the outcomes of the negotiation can break down along sex lines. And that shouldn't be surprising because you have shared similarities across gender and across states of being. So does that exclude the guys from being the ones to clean up? Absolutely not. But at the same time, is that where the male bonding typically happens? Not really. In community doing things, is that where female bonding tends to happen? Yeah, quite a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, just leave people alone.
Yeah.
I was just gonna add to your very last point, Duff. Like my dad was the one who ran the kitchen in my house, and God, if you were in the kitchen with him, he didn't like it. He wanted you out of there. There was no help me with this. It was just get out of my way. So I find that at least what you last said kind of resonated with me.
Yeah, and Crow's right in that the problem is we're not allowing for self-selecting groups because they can lead to exclusionary tendencies. And I'm happy that people are noticing exclusionary tendencies and saying, hey, what can we do to lessen these and make sure that their effects aren't as stigmatizing as they can be if they're left unchecked. But at the same time, the ideologues are literally saying any group that forms naturally is inherently a biased, racist, or somehow bigoted entity, or a misogynist entity kind of thing. And it's like, that's not true. You're positing ill will prior to something even happening, or positing ill will in a sphere which you can't actually point to where the ill will comes from. And I think that's really the negotiation, is we need to allow people to make mistakes, to screw up, but also give them the guidance they need to understand what's acceptable behavior and what things aren't so much.
Yeah, so basically the bottom line is we should have some standard rules. That's basically the solution. That's what people need. They just need some basic rules to follow.
I like the law as
I don't like law.
Pretty good basic rules. I feel like, you know, and not just the workplace. Like, I feel like college campuses are going way beyond what they should be doing. And you can make a stronger case for this when you talk about schools, because, you know, like, they're not employed. Like, you're giving them your money. You know what I mean? So, but on a college campus, you're giving them your money. And, you know, obviously if a crime happens, they should be reporting it to the police. But short of that, I think it's very strange that a school feels that they have the obligation to kind of meddle with people's personal and romantic lives. And they're not even romantic, just their social lives. Like, who cares if it's romantic? Guys, girls have dynamics, period. Guys and guys have dynamics, period. And I think a school should just be teaching. And I think at your job, they should just be trying to produce whatever it is that they produce.
Yeah. And it sort of breaks people down into different groups, but the ones wanting to do the policing, if I were to say the movie Minority Report, the technology that allows you to prevent crimes from happening prior to them happening, good or bad. And from my perspective, I would say bad, because you haven't committed the act yet. You haven't actually broken the rules. Whereas these people would say that is an excellent technology because we can't trust people. And if we prevent them from making mistakes before they even make them, then we'll have a perfect society. And it's like, well, no, what you'll have is a society that is made up entirely of, let's say, people who are utterly immature because they've never had to deal with the consequences of their actions. And, you know, that's a horrific thing to say, because it's like, that means that I'm literally saying, if we could prevent a murder before it happens, even before someone actually tries to commit the act, that would actually be a bad thing. And people be like, but it would prevent a murder. It's like, well, sure. But at the same time, it's not giving you freedom of thought. And we do need to allow people to be free thinkers, because who knows, most people who have murderous thoughts don't act on them. So if we're going to be policing people just for what they might do or for bad think, then we're not actually allowing people to be people, and we're not actually allowing them to develop those self-editing protocols in their behaviors.
Yeah, I had a friend actually, without even realizing he was basically rewriting Minority Report, tell me that if we could tell that somebody was going to commit an awful crime, such as like round up a bunch of Jews and kill them, you know, this is where everybody's heads go, that we should stop them beforehand, and we would be justified in stopping them beforehand. And to that, I agree with everything you just said, but I also want to add that if we ever, and I know this is getting kind of sci-fi and stuff, but I think there's a point to be made here that kind of touches on pretty much every social issue we can think of. But sometimes the technology or the movement or the means in which you can kind of predict what's going to happen, it doesn't exist outside of that system. Like, to what extent does your predictive tool help create the thing that's happening, right?
Or does it even work? That's another question to ask. Does it even work?
Well, yeah, sure. Does it even work? But let's assume it worked, right? Who's to say that this super advanced Facebook algorithm that can, with like a 99% accuracy, determine who is about to commit a crime, right? Based on like their patterns on Facebook, who's to say that in part it's like us knowing that exists is what kind of created this hostile environment, which makes one of us want to commit a crime to begin. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's sort of like it could be feeding the crime that it's preventing.
Yeah, it becomes a chicken and egg sort of fallacy. And this is where it blows my mind that a lot of these people who promote, like, we need to prevent things from happening because bad things happen, and preventing bad things is our entire lot in life, don't understand how the legal system recognizes mens rea and actus rea. So bad thinking and bad action. So we don't prosecute, or technically we didn't used to prosecute people for bad thought. What we would prosecute them for is bad thought leading to bad action. In the same way, we don't prosecute people, or we didn't used to prosecute people to the same degree for bad action without bad thought. So hence you have the degrees of sentencing with regards to, it's like, oops, I accidentally hit the garage door thing when my dad was walking underneath of it, and it kind of clipped his back. Did I commit a criminal act? It's like, well, no, you were not thinking to maim your dad, ideally, but you did commit a bad action. Therefore, we need to address that, but it's not a legal concern. And the relationship between mens rea and actus rea is actually a really good one, because it allows us to delineate how people are acting. But from the perspective of those who want to control every aspect of human interaction, the idea that there is a difference between bad thought and bad action, or that bad action doesn't necessarily mean bad thought, or bad thought doesn't necessarily need to lead to bad action, is superfluous to them, because they think that there is only one way of acting anyways. And that's what makes them so prone to pushing for things that lead to groupthink.
And ironically, that sounds more religious than any of the like religious stuff that they often criticize.
Yeah, statism tends to do that.
What'd you say?
I think statism tends to do that.
Yeah.
Basically, if you take a look at the idea of a government, it is very religious. You have a few people who are the government, who write their commandments or threats or laws, whatever you want to call them. And then people must obey. You have to obey the commandments. Fuck you. Yeah.
Yeah, and in a weird way, this kind of slides into what happened with Count Dankula on the internet and also in real life about 2 weeks ago, where he was sentenced, or will be sentenced, for a criminal misdemeanor based off of teaching his girlfriend's pug to do the Nazi salute when he uses a key word. And the fact that that is being prosecuted as a criminal act, as a hate crime, in fact, is mind-blowing to me, because, you know, you have comedians like Jimmy Carr, and I forget where this was brought up, but Jimmy Carr literally has a skit called The Most Offensive Jokes. And he gets to the point where he's actually joking about, like, murdering people in very elaborate ways. And of course, he's never been brought to trial. But with the precedent that is set with what Count Dankula has been accused of and found guilty of, Jimmy Carr should very much be in jail too. And it's just like, wow.
Yeah, here's the thing. I think that Justice Clarence Thomas is one of the few people in any court who I can actually respect on this idea. Basically, he says that precedent is absolutely meaningless. And I agree, because you can find precedent on everything. Seriously, I'm not kidding. You can find precedent on every single issue on both sides. Okay, you can find precedent for both sides of every single issue. Like, for instance, if you're a doctor and you take a day off and one of your patients needs your services, but you're taking a day off, you're on vacation or whatever, should you be held liable because your patient died, because you weren't there, because you were taking a day off like any human being? There are some cases that say yes and some court cases that say no. So you can find legal precedent on both sides of every single issue. You know, segregation. Plessy versus Ferguson said that mandatory government segregation was okay. Then Brown versus Board of Ed said, no, it's not okay. So where do you draw the line at precedent? It just doesn't make any sense.
I think the problem is not, I think you're right, but this is like, it's always kind of shocking when the precedent is first set, or at least seemingly first set. So here, like, I can't think of a case in modern history in the West where somebody is being tried as a criminal for for a joke. And the crime is what, like officially on the books, it's just hate crime? Is that just what it's called?
Yeah, it's called the hate crime. It's a very vague
right. And
category.
It's a very new thing. So I think it's scary when, and I think it's worth paying attention to because it's kind of an indicator of times are changing, you know, because before this whole Count Dankula thing, nobody in the UK had reason to believe that their jokes would be subjecting them to a 2-year court battle and then sentence. You know what I mean? I think that's why we have to resist it, because if we don't, then now they can just point to the Count Dankula's thing for the next guy. So I think I get what you're saying, that there are precedents of on each way, but like I think because it's so new, it went from 0 to 1, right? It's like a big jump.
Yeah, with precedent, I'd say, from my understanding, the issue is more so that judges don't like setting precedents because it means that their legal opinions can be used for other cases, and therefore their legal methodology for how they came about to their sentencing procedure would be being applied to other people's cases, which that judge did not sit over. And hence why a lot of judges are very hesitant to do that, because their legal reasoning may be more case specific, but lawyers want to use it more broadly. So the idea that precedent is there is not necessarily bad if what you're treating precedent as is an aggregate database of how certain cases or certain types of cases have played out. But to make it legally binding is within reason.
Well, basically the only way to get away from this is to abandon the concept of the rule of law, you know, because here's the thing. If we take a look at the fundamental issue at hand here, it's the idea that you have to obey the law, regardless of what the law says. And that's the problem. So I think that this is kind of a blessing in disguise, this Count Dankula case, because the more stupid laws there are, the less respect many people have for the law as a concept. And I think that's a great thing. I think that the sooner people abandon this concept of rule of law, the better, because it seems like right now, actually it doesn't even seem like, right now, everyone is a criminal in the United States. Everybody. All right? You've broken tons of laws. Everyone has. Most Americans have used illegal drugs. Most Americans have met an illegal immigrant and didn't report it to ICE, which is a federal crime, aiding and abetting illegal immigration. All right? So you have tons of laws that just about everyone is broken. All right? So the more stupid laws they pass, I think that it's kind of a blessing in disguise, because you just undermine respect for the concept of law when you pass incredibly stupid rules. So,
well, I think it would be more the concept of law as something which is imposed from an externalized entity, as opposed to, say, something like the precedents that led to the creation of English common law, where essentially you would come together and negotiate with people along set lines about whether or not you had been wronged. And the law's entire premise was setting those principles so that people could come together regardless of estate, regardless of social rank, and be able to come to a fair settlement that wasn't biased towards one side or the other from the outset.
Yeah, and I think for me, like, you make a compelling point, Crow, about the silver linings you brought up. But like, to me, it's still, I'm worried about the culture. Because what does it mean when I share this post and about half my friends are like, well, yeah, he shouldn't have been making that joke. Like that scares me more than the law itself. Like, why are so many people that I know personally justifying this? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's an issue, and that's something that should be addressed. But it all starts with you. You know, you gotta hold true to principle and then teach other people your principles. And that's basically the best shot you have.
Yeah. But also, I think this alludes to something which we talked about a little earlier, is that we tend to make religions out of things. And the idea of not offending someone's sensibilities has become a religious edict within our sort of cultural milieu in the West. And that's a problem, because once again, that takes away the relationship between mens rea and actus rea. What Count Dankula did was, he said, I'm going to drive my girlfriend nuts by turning this pug, which she loves so much, into a Nazi sympathizer, quote unquote, right? And what the justice ended up saying is that his stated reasons for doing what he did don't excuse what he did to the pug. And it's like, but all the pug does is lift its leg. The pug doesn't know that it has hateful connotations. The word which he chose is in poor taste, but he wasn't directing it towards any particular ethnic group. And by and large, like Jewish community groups have not been as upset about this as the court of public opinion has tried to make them seem. And that's what our current society is having a problem with, is we're taking legal apparatuses and turning them into human rights tribunals that don't also hold the same standard for what proves you guilty versus innocent. So public opinion is more likely to sway a verdict than actual legal or at least logical reasoning. And that, for me, is terrifying.
Salem witch trials, yo.
Yeah, that amongst other things. But gentlemen, we have 8 minutes left. Are there any other topics anyone would like to bring up?
Let's see. Well, actually, now that I think about it, I just want to talk about the Nazi pug thing first, just a second. I'm glad to see that many in mainstream media are actually defending this guy. Even in The Guardian, the Nazi pug, giving offense is inevitable and often necessary in a plural society. So I think that it's pretty indicative of many people's opinions that even mainstream media outlets are saying, hey, this is kind of stupid. This is a very dangerous precedent to set. So I think that we're good for now, but still keep fighting, still keep advocating principles.
Yeah, and just to sort of get back to this. Now, this is Scotland. And they, of course, have had, different groups agitating for things which they want for the longest time. But I always try and think back to George Carlin's 7 words which you can't say on television, right?
You want to say them for us?
Shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits. Ironically, cocksucker, motherfucker, tits, and cunt were totally okay to say in the UK at the time. It was just American Puritanism that prevented them from being said there. But this idea that you should be able to restrict people's speech and expression when no bad intent is meant is a battle which we keep on fighting, and in various forms. And the sad part is that there are people who would totally say, George Carlin, we totally agree with what he said, great advocate for free speech and free expression, but they might also turn around and say Count Dankula went far too far. And it's like, well, how do you do that? What is the measure that you hold these things up against? And that's the thing which I'm continuously scratching my head about. What is this measure? And why is it that only one group seems to hold it and prevent everyone else from seeing it, but they use it to lash out at other people?
Well, speaking of that, where you said we're always dealing with this kind of problem, it actually reminds me of something that really reassures me, that we don't really need a majority in many cases to preserve various rights. Because I remember reading that only about, at most, 40% of colonists supported the American Revolution. Another 30-something% were loyalists, and the rest were indifferent. So a minority of people, at most 40% of the people, supported the greatest revolution to ever exist in the history of mankind. And it worked. So with that being said, it does show that there is hope for freedom, and technology is definitely something that helps with freedom. The internet basically makes it that even if government wants to crack down on speech, it is nigh impossible to do so. So I do have optimism for the future, whether it's 3D printed guns, Cody Wilson, God bless you, or the internet or anything else. I do have optimism that the world will be freer over time. And that is what we're seeing around the world, that overall people are becoming more free.
Well, they are certainly taking steps in making the internet less free. I don't know if you know, just this week, apparently, sites like Craigslist, they got rid of their personal section, which was like a huge deal, right? So if you go to Craigslist, is it org? I don't even know anymore. If you go to Craigslist and try to go to any of like the, men for women, women for women, whatever, it's still there, the link. But when you click it, there's just a big page telling you that they have to abide by some new laws. So they just shut it down. So I don't know.
You could always make your own websites and get around it. The Chinese do.
Well, yeah, but a lot of these sites are, the reason they're taking it down is because they could be subject to legal penalty, right? So I'm just saying, like, yeah, but they make it really hard. And now, just like every other like prohibition we've experienced, we're putting things further into this like underground black market, right?
Yeah.
This is all just to combat human trafficking. But now, you know, just like the gun debate, just like pretty much every debate, you have millions of otherwise law-abiding citizens who, I mean, I don't know if I don't have any sentimental attachment to this, but you know, they can't meet people on Craigslist. That's it's hard for me to say without laughing, but it's kind of shitty. Like most people aren't doing anything wrong.
There's no such thing as a law-abiding citizen, though. Let's just be real.
What's that?
There's no such thing as a law-abiding citizen. Let's just be real.
Well, I'm saying they didn't break the law that you're trying to protect them, that you're trying to reduce.
Oh yeah, human trafficking. Okay.
Yeah.
Fine.
They weren't breaking that law. Yeah.
Yeah, they weren't breaking that one, but they were breaking tons of others.
Well, and it also just speaks to the catch-22 between the fact that we as humans tend to focus on negative things more than we focus on positive things. But that the degree to which people will advocate for a position can be utterly disproportionate to its actual representation of society or to the general good that it could do for a society, quote unquote. And I think that's where advocates for free speech, advocates for free online internet spaces and free spaces to speak in the world in general, really have to double down on, is to say, look, these issues which you're bringing up, although important to you, statistically, are actually pretty unimportant. And the things which we're defending will actually allow for what you're doing without having to enforce them on people to any greater or lesser degree. So what you're saying is by we want the world to be X way, you're actually preventing people from making it that way in a more natural fashion. And, you know, Steven Pinker's book, Enlightenment Now, actually talks about this quite a bit. So, you know, I'd highly recommend that. But with that there, gentlemen, thanks for joining us tonight. And JP, thanks for coming out to Rovertime for your first ever appearance. And Crow, thank you for being a returning guest with us. And ladies and gentlemen, I hope you all have a happy and healthy Easter. This has been the Rovertime podcast. Please join us again next week for Rovertime. Same Rover time, same Rover channel. Have a great one.
Ciao.